begin. So, before we do any experiment, we should always make observations so that way we know how things are changing, if anything's changing. So there are two different things that we're going to be adding, and I'll write down both of their names so we can compare and contrast. The first thing that I'm putting in is copper sulfate. Now you don't need to worry about writing any of this down right now. And I'll also write down the formula for copper sulfate so you guys know what that is as well. So I'll put some copper sulfate out. I'm holding the copper sulfate so you guys can see it's in my little jar. What color do we notice it so far? It's a blue color. It's like a baby blue. And if I'm looking at the texture of it, what sort of texture does it have? It's kind of like powdery, right? So I'm going to put some copper sulfate in there. I'm just going to spread it out so we can see it. Refocusing it. There you go. So that's copper sulfate. The other thing that I'm going to be putting down is copper carbonate. So copper carbonate is CuCO3. And I'll hold out the copper carbonate so you guys can see it. It's a greeny color. Is it still very powdery though?
Yeah. Not watery.
Yeah, they're both powdery.
It looks like it's liquid carbonate.
Did you say copper carbonate?
Carbonate.
Carbonate.
So you can see it hopefully on the screen. I'm going to put some in there. It's basically like a little powder, eh? All right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put these two evaporating dishes, that's what we call them, onto a hot plate, and I'm going to let it heat to see if there's going to be any sort of a reaction. Heat is really important because they can provide energy to allow for reactions to occur. All right, so I'm going to move that over there. That's going to be the main thing for our first bit. I'm also need to get a little plate, a little thing, and we'll check on this in later in this lesson. We also get a top plate. That way I don't damage my. Just thinking about comparison. So we compared the colors, so they're different colors, right? But are they similar kind of like texture? Are they similar to texture?
Yes.
Yeah, because they're both powder. When you're looking at the names, what do you guys notice about the names of those two substances?
They're very similar.
They're very similar. What's the same about both of them?
They both have Cu.
They both have Cu, which is our copper. Do you guys know what the O's are? They both have oxygen, but you see how they have different numbers of oxygens. This one has 3 oxygens, that one has 4 oxygens. Alright, and then we notice that center atom is different. In this case, carbon. In this case, sulfur. And the names kind of make sense when I say copper and carbon, right?
Yeah.
So sulfate makes sense because there's sulfur. Carbonate makes sense because there's carbon. Alright, so we're going to leave that to heat for a couple of minutes. We'll check back on it later. While we wait, I want us to work on the investigation from the other day. So let me grab that. So this investigation plan that you guys hopefully have not lost. All right, if you don't have the investigation plan, I do have some photocopies. So does anyone need a copy of the investigation so they can finish it? Then take it out. You lost it. If you have it, RJ. You need it? If you have one. Well, let me stop the recording. You don't need the recording anymore. All right, everybody. So, put the devices away. Get your science notebooks in front because we're going to do some notes. All right, and let's make some observations. So, remember how we had copper sulfate and it was a blue color?
Yeah.
All right, I now have the dish with it, and that evaporating dish, that powder now, whoops, let me unfreeze that screen. That powder now, is it the same color? Is that the same color still? No, it has now gone white, hasn't it? All right, this one was our copper sulfate. It was a green color. Now here's it after heating. What color is it now?
Brown, black.
Black.
Oh,
So,
Oh, sulfate.
that one's not the sulfur, that one's the carbonate.
Wow.
So,
So, confident.
looking at the after product, do you think a chemical reaction has occurred? Yes or no? Yes, because it's been a color change, hasn't there? Yeah? Now let's see, or sorry, I shouldn't say if there's been a chemical reaction, because one of them actually isn't a chemical reaction, one's a physical reaction. All right. So, when we're looking at this here, when I heated it, I'm gonna add some water back to it to see if maybe there was just an evaporation of water that occurred. So here's the black one. I added some water to it. Has anything happened?
Yes.
Yes,
It went liquid.
It turned liquid, but it's still a black powder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, here's my white powder from the copper sulfate that's been reacted. It's that white. All right, let's see what happens.
Oh,
Turns
good job.
functional.
It's turned blue. What was the initial substance color? Blue. So did that go back to what it started as?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yes, it did. So let's talk about what happened. So
Why did you mix it all together?
if I mix them both together, it's just going to turn into like a muddy color.
Sulfate.
All right. Cool. So let's get some notes down about chemical versus physical changes. So when I have something that is a physical change, and I want you guys to write this down in your notes. So physical change, or I should actually say physical reactions, so if I have a physical reaction, there is no change in chemical. The other thing about this is that it's often a phase change. You guys know what a phase change is? So it's like if I freeze water into ice, is it still the same substance? Yes, it's just in a solid form. If I boil the water and I see like vapors coming off, is it still water?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's just in the gas form. So often a phase change, often easily reversible.
Except when it turns into gas.
Yeah. And in this case, it's something like, so I'll do examples, making ice, slicing bread. So those are all examples of physical changes because I haven't actually changed what I have chemically. So in this reaction here with the copper sulfate, this one here, what happened was I had copper sulfate and I heated it. Now the only difference between these two copper sulfates is that this one has water and this copper sulfate, when we heated it, doesn't have water because it evaporated. So that was the blue color and that was the white color. So do we see how if I added water back to the copper sulfate that's been heated, it turned back to that blue color? So I reversed it. So this here is an example of a physical reaction. All I did is I removed the water and then I added it back in. So if I put this back on my heating plate and I evaporated the water again, would it turn white?
Yes.
Yeah, and then I can add water again and reverse it. All right, I'm just mindful of the time because I want to give enough time to do pack up. So we'll finish the notes in our next lesson because we need to talk about what chemical reactions are. All right, sound good? Okay, so I need you guys to spray and wipe down the tables. Give me a second just to get my book so that way I can't get in any of my items.